I'd like to call to order the regular meeting on Tuesday, July the 19th at Vintage Hall. Aaron, would you do the pledge, please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Monette?
Here.
Commissioner Pont?
Here.
Commissioner Knudsen is currently absent. Chair Kistner?
Here.
Vice Chair Hardy is absent as well.
I haven't heard from either one of them. Have you heard from either one of them?
Commissioner Hardy has indicated he will be absent. I have not heard from Commissioner Knudsen.
Okay. Next item is public forum. This is an opportunity for the public to address the Commission on items of interest to the public that are not on this agenda. Because of restrictions imposed by the Brown Act, the Commission may not engage in discussion or take action on matters not described on the agenda. Please observe the time limit of 4 minutes. Any public comment?
Jeff Ellsworth, Sylvaner Avenue, speaking as a resident, and I just wanted to thank Grace for all the work she's done on the Planning Commission over these many years, and it's very much appreciated.
Thank you, Jeff. Any more public comment?
Mary Koberstein. I live on the corner of Sylvaner and Pinot, and speaking not just as a resident, but as a former Planning Commission member and now City Council member, to thank Grace for all of her years of service to the community. I'm sure it's not going to stop with her, the end of her term. She was a wonderful mentor to me when I joined the Planning Commission, and then when we had the opportunity to work together as chair and vice chair. I think the biggest regret is that this plan has not been adopted yet before you're leaving, but hopefully it'll happen this year. So thanks a lot.
Thank you, Mary. That's a big regret of mine, Todd. I'd like to see the general plan finished.
Hi, my name is Tom Belt. I live in Hillview Place in St. Helena, and I would also like to take this opportunity to thank you, Grace, for all the hard work you've done, all the dedication, all the hard decisions you've had to make, all the efforts you've had to come to in your personal self to make decisions in some cases over these issues that you've had to face with the other commissioners. And I've grown to know you a little bit in the last couple of years, and you've always been honest. You've sometimes been firm with me and with others, I'm sure, but you've always, most importantly, been fair. You've been very fair, and I just want to tell you how much I appreciate all the effort that you've put into this whole job that you've undertaken. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tom. I couldn't ask for anything better than saying I'm fair.
I certainly would like to echo my thanks and appreciation to Grace for these 8 years. I think I've been part of her sounding board, and she would come home from these meetings and I'd say, why did you vote that way? I wouldn't have voted that way. She'd say, we have codes, we have ordinances, and we have law. And that's what we follow when we make a decision on the Planning Commission. So with great equanimity, she's able to do that, even I think sometimes when she wished she could have voted the other way. So I have to respect her for that. I don't think I could have done it as well. So thank you, Grace, for your years of service.
Thank you, Pat.
Paul Doring, St. Helena City Council. I walked in late, so I didn't know what other people said, but I will say what I need to say. Thank you very much on behalf of the City of St. Helena, the City Council, all our residents, for all of you've done for our community. You exemplify public service. You've done a great job. You've been tough. You've been fair. You've been prepared. I am proud of you, and you should be proud of yourself for all of your service to our community. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul.
Take 2 weeks off. You'll be assigned a new task.
Yeah, I left Los Angeles to get away from tasks, so, and I don't want to leave St. Helena. Thanks, Paul. All right, the next item on the agenda is the consent items. Members of the Commission or the public may ask that any item be considered individually for purposes of consideration, alternative action, for extended discussion, or for public comment. Unless this is done, a motion may be used to adopt all recommended actions. We have 4.1 is a request by Steve Robertson on behalf of CH-Smokey J.V. LP for approval of a resolution granting a sign permit for new signage at the St. Helena Plaza located at 1136-1154 Main Street in the Central Business District.
Move the
Anyone have
consent
any
calendar.
comments? John?
No, move the consent calendar.
Well,
Second.
Is there any public comment on this item? The applicant's not here. Would you like to speak?
I think I'm fine with the report.
All right, fine.
I'll speak.
I'm fine.
May I have a motion, please?
Move the consent calendar.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Pont,
Yes.
Commissioner Monette,
Yes.
Chair Kistner.
Yes. I would just like to commend you. I really think you're doing a great job there. I really like I was down there yesterday, and I really like the way it looks.
Well, thank you. We've got ways to go, but we're getting there.
Yeah, I'm very anxious to see the awnings without things hanging off of them. Good luck.
Thank you.
Number 5 is public hearing. Request by Brian Moore on behalf of Verizon Wireless for the adoption of a resolution granting design review approval in order to place a 12-foot high addition on the existing PG&E tower to accommodate 6 new panel antennas and associated equipment in the property located near the 1600 block of Grayson Avenue in the A20 zoning district. May I have a staff report, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair Kistner and fellow planning commissioners. The applicant wishes to install a 12-foot extension on an existing 83-foot PG&E lattice tower to accommodate 6 new wireless panel antennas and associated equipment, including remote radio units, ray caps, and cables. The proposed project includes a 13 by 13-foot concrete pad that would be enclosed with a 6-foot high fence in order to house equipment cabinets, meters, a transformer, and possibly an emergency generator. This 169 square foot area would be located within the footprint of the existing lattice tower, essentially directly underneath the tower itself. Primary access to the site would be from existing roads access roads via Grayson Avenue, and the site can also be reached by several vineyard maintenance roads that connect to Charter Oak. As noted in Section 332C7 of the Communications Act, a state or local government may not unreasonably discriminate among providers of functionally equivalent services, may not regulate in a manner that prohibits or has the effect of prohibiting the provision of personal wireless services, must act on applications within a reasonable period of time, and must make any denial of an application in writing supported by substantial evidence in the written record. The statute also preempts local decisions premised directly or indirectly on environmental effects of radio frequency, or RF emissions. Yes, the statute also preempts local decisions premised directly or indirectly on the environmental effects of radio frequency emissions. If the municipal code allows for consideration and denial of an application based on factors such as aesthetics, then there may be grounds for denying an application, but the record must provide substantial evidence for the denial through clear findings supported by evidence in the record. As noted in the staff report, the city has no standalone telecommunications ordinance. St. Helena Municipal Code Section 17136010 relates to satellite antennas, and Code Section 17136020 relates to radio and television antennas. Satellite antennas means any antenna established to receive transmissions from satellites. It is staff's understanding that cell towers are wired directly to the provider's network and that no satellites are involved. Additionally, the proposed antennas are not for radio or television transmission. Therefore, Section 17136020 does not apply either. In the absence of telecommunications ordinance, staff is relying on design review as a modification of an existing structure and within the limitations set by federal law to evaluate the proposed project. The applicant has demonstrated the proposed antennas will help fill a coverage need, and the placement of the antennas on an existing tower is far less intrusive and disruptive than erecting a new tower somewhere else in town. The proposed addition of wireless antennas on the existing lattice tower would be a minimal visual change, as the site is largely agricultural in area where existing lattice towers are part of the existing visual character. Additionally, the location, height, and distance of the antennas reduce their overall visibility. Additional wireless antennas on the valley floor will increase communication capabilities, which could be advantageous in the event of a natural disaster. For these reasons, staff believes that the proposed project is consistent with required design review findings and therefore recommends that the Planning Commission determines the project is exempt from the requirements of CEQA and accept the required findings and approve a resolution granting design review for the proposed addition of wireless antennas on the existing PG&E lattice tower. The applicant will likely be requesting a continuance this evening to the July 3rd, 2018 Planning Commission meeting so that we can modify and work through some of the conditions of approval. However, we should open this public hearing to anyone that is here that wants to speak on the item, and staff would like to hear any comments and or concerns that the Planning Commission has about the towers.
Anyone on the staff have questions?
You mean on the commission?
Yes. Yeah. Sorry, Bobby.
Oh, I have kind of a, I think it's probably silly because I'm just wondering if it's high enough to interfere with balloons or helicopters or field crop dusters. I mean, the extra height, is it still way within that, or is that?
Nothing that I'm aware of. We can ask the applicant that question as well.
Oh, okay. And then, oh yeah, is it, never mind. Then that's all I need. Yeah.
I've got a couple of questions, if I could, please. You start off by saying that 17136020 does not apply. I would argue it does, and let me tell you why. First off, regardless of what anybody thinks, these are transceivers. These are radio transceivers. And at one time, all the spectrum they used was radio spectrum and sold as such. Even the federal regulations mention radio frequency as part of their determination. On top of that, our definition in 17136020 reads, the term antenna as used in this section, that's what we're talking about, is the antenna. Means any system of wires, poles, rods, reflecting discs, or similar devices used for the transmission or reception of electromagnetic waves. This clearly is a system to transmit and receive electromagnetic waves. So it seems to me it falls under the definition of 17136020.
Staff notes that the Commission will remember and recall identification of this code section as being out of compliance with state and federal law and been on the list identified by the Planning Commission and the City Council as needing updating. So Commissioner Ponce's comments are noted and will be taken into consideration as staff looks at the applicability of the zoning code provisions through the lens of the legislation that's been passed.
I would think we just wouldn't apply those sections that are not legal anymore. I would assume we'd have a severability clause in the thing someplace. So all we have to do is sever out those sections that law, state or federal, has superseded, correct?
Sure. Yeah, and one of those I think is the requirement for a use permit in this situation.
Okay.
So, but again, staff would need time to look at some of these issues. There's significant legislation at both the federal and state level regarding cellular infrastructure.
And it has kept on coming. Okay, that's most of that I have to talk to staff about.
So staff will get back to us about that, or what?
Yes, so the applicant has requested a continuance tonight because they have some concerns over the conditions of approval in the resolution, and we need time to work on those, just to basically understand their concerns and ensure that we can provide accurate information regarding them. There's kind of two issues with this situation. We are under a shot clock. Part of the legislation that's passed is these decisions have to be made subject to a 90-day or 150-day shot clock, or else they are automatically deemed approved. So some of the issues that are broader and may take more time, obviously a zoning code text amendment would be something that takes more time. However, in the event that the Planning Commission grants a continuance, staff will work to try to answer some of the specific questions that are identified tonight through this discussion and come back with additional information for the Commission. We do want to ensure that we do not run up against that shot clock or put the Commission in a decision, or the Commission or the applicant in a situation where a lack of action or additional information need would result in an automatic approval.
Do you know if it's possible, if you're waiting for some significant information or process to happen, if you can ask for an extension of that shot clock?
There's what's called a tolling agreement. We've been discussing that with the applicants. If resolution of the issues would trigger the need for such a formal pause, we will pursue that.
Okay, thank you.
David?
Just to clarify, thank you very much, Chair Kistner. Director Hausch, basically, your belief is, but it requires further investigation, is that our ability to attach use permit type conditions to this approval are likely contravened by state or federal regulations.
That is staff's understanding today. However, we would like more time to verify that. It's our understanding that the application and the ability for the Commission to limit or to regulate this use is purely based on the aesthetics. So that's hence the design review application, which is before the Commission.
And ironically, design review over these sorts of structures would also tend to be limited, would it not? So we may not even have sort of purview regardless. Is that possible?
Potentially not to the extent the Commission would like.
Thanks.
All right, I have a couple comments. I would suggest that you would look at the problems they're having with these things in Santa Rosa. The city's being sued in Santa Rosa because of the looks of these things on the poles, and they're terribly looking. I agree with the people that are raising a fuss over there. So I think you want to look into that before you go. They're great big things that they stick up on the top of the poles, and they're not very nice to look at. There's a couple of ladies over there that are picketing, and I'd hate to have to do that after I get off of this spotty here. So I would suggest that you look into the problems that Santa Rosa's having. Since he's asking for a continuance, I recognize the applicant probably doesn't want to speak. Does he want to speak tonight?
We should open the public hearing.
Hmm?
We should open the public hearing.
Let him speak first.
Good afternoon, Commissioners, Chairperson. My name is Brian Moore, and I'm here today on behalf of the applicant, Verizon Wireless. As Mr. Heacock explained, we are requesting a continuance until the July 3rd hearing, and the basis for that request is to further vet out some of the conditions of approvals that has come across our plate. The applicant has some questions about some of those conditions, and being sensitive to the shot clock, we thought it would be best to continue this to allow both my client and the city time to get a better understanding on what these proposed conditions may entail and how they may impact the applicant. So in essence, I did take note of all of you guys' concerns, and it's our position to work with the city to alleviate any concerns that we have the ability to do so within the confines of local, federal, and state law. And so with that being said, I really just wanted to get up here and introduce myself and put a face to the name, and then I'm more than willing to hear any concerns the public may have, and then I will go back and discuss that with the applicant, Verizon Wireless, during the process that the planning department and myself are working through these conditions of approvals.
All right, we'll consider your request after the public comment.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Public comment is open. Is there any public comment? Seeing there's no public comment, I'll close it. Do I hear a motion for continuance?
There's no discussion for us?
I've got a couple questions for Mr. Moore, if I could, please, Madam Chair.
All right.
Just go with these ones. I notice on the drawings it calls for an access easement. Is this a new access easement, or are you simply overlaying on top of already existing access?
I believe it's an already existing access easement with the underlying property owner that we are going to be taking advantage of to get access to the proposed site.
So it's a PG&E access easement, and you're going to overlay over the top of it?
Correct.
Okay. Including underground, I presume, as well?
Some of it's underground, some of it's going to be above ground, taking advantage of the existing utility infrastructure that's in place.
Okay. Presuming you have all the other permissions and approvals necessary. You have the access easement in your hand. You have a PG&E agreement. Actually, do you guys go under a PT&T sub-agreement?
I'm not sure what you mean by a PT&T sub-agreement.
Since you're not a public utility, right? And PT&T is, generally speaking, to use PG&E facilities and towers, PT&T has the agreement and then subs it to other communications companies.
I would like to defer answering that question till the July 3rd hearing, with all due respect. Verizon Wireless is a public utility. They do file all of their conditions of approval with the CPUC. So I think the applicant is within its rights to take advantage of the underlying access easement with PG&E. I think really that's an issue between PG&E having the vested rights in the property and the applicant.
Okay. Are there other forms of towers available?
Yeah, there's a variety of different methodologies that can be implemented into these wireless telecommunications facilities, but it's the applicant's position to first and foremost identify a significant gap in coverage and then try to find the least intrusive means to fulfill that gap. And so with that being said, we typically like to co-locate on existing structures because it has less of an impact, both aesthetically and economically for the applicant. And so in this case scenario, there was already an existing structure there. If that wasn't there, or the applicant could propose a monopole guised as a tree of some sort, but we feel as if taking advantage of the existing structure is the least intrusive means to achieve the coverage, mitigate the coverage gap that we're experiencing in that area.
So you're saying that you do take aesthetics into account?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Then may I ask how you ended up with such a displeasing, unaesthetic structure in what is arguably one of the prettiest small towns in California?
I mean, that's. I am sensitive to your concerns, Commissioner. However, the state and federal law has certain criterias that boards and members such as yourself evaluate these types of applications. And so, and with the technology that's in place, there is somewhat of a limitation as to how we can design these types of facilities. And to circle back, our intention is to fulfill a significant gap in coverage and to do it by the least intrusive means. And so that's what we feel that this application represents. And, I am sensitive to your concerns, and I will have a discussion with my client and the planning board to see what, if anything, can be done, but I can't make any promises at this time. Again, I'm here to listen to concerns, but I really don't want to get too deep into petitioning the board at this point for an approval, because we still have some housekeeping matters that need to be addressed prior to when we get that point. So
when you do come back, I would love to see the process, a diagram of the process, perhaps, of how you came to the decision to put this type of tower in here and how the aesthetics of the tower worked into that decision?
Absolutely. We do go through a site selection process.
I would definitely appreciate seeing that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Are there any other questions, comments, or concerns?
Well, I have some concerns.
I have a question
Go
as
ahead.
well, but
Yeah.
do you have for Mr. Moore?
I had some concerns I'd like to express, and
Bobby, would you wait until you're called on, David?
Okay. Mr. Moore, just some
he's answering his question.
brief question, and sorry, Bobby, I'll be brief. I'm just curious technically, what sort of coverage does Verizon currently have in the Upper Valley area? I noticed that these are essentially 4 nodes, alpha, beta, gamma. I'm sorry, 6 nodes in 3 sections, alpha, beta, gamma. What sort of throughput does this allow, and what percentage increase would it be for coverage for the town of St. Helena and Upper Valley compared to your existing towers?
It is significant. The additional wireless telecommunications facility will provide a significant amount of coverage that is currently not in place. So that will be something that I am ready, willing, and able to present to you on the 3rd. We'll bring in some coverage maps that provide a nice visual diagram of the before and after, so you'll get a good sense of what the current coverage looks like now. You'll be able to see the significant gap in coverage, and then you'll be able to see what it will look like afterwards through this visual diagram.
That'd be great, and maybe also you can just diagram out the existing. I don't think it's a trade secret. I think it's public record, actually. Maybe where the existing towers are and what the existing coverage is over the Upper Valley area.
Those towers are on the coverage map, so you can see how the network interplays with one another when we're talking about the different wireless facilities in and around this proposed site.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Bobby?
Yeah, I had some concerns, and I'm assuming that the height difference is not going to get in the way of any helicopters or anything. Or did you look at that? Or
Yeah. We run all these proposed developments by the FAA.
I figured it would.
Yeah, and so
Okay.
we're good on that end.
But I do want to point out one thing. There was some public comment or concern about the view shed and about covering views, and I know that we're told we don't have anything about view sheds sometimes in our 93 general plan, but we do in sections 4.6.1, 0.2.3, and 3.4.15 all talk about being sensitive to views when new construction of anything happens. And so there is a complaint about that. So that's one thing I just wanted to, because you've chosen a place to do this where there are homes. And some of these homes are going to have their views impacted. So that was one concern that I wanted to express to you. The others, I thought that Mr. Chen and Mr. Friedrich, they both wrote letters, and I'm not sure what you've already seen, but I thought that the idea of having a condition that there would be a new application for any additional antennas, if you build this, that there would need to be a new application for more. I thought that was a really good suggestion, and I also thought that there should be some condition in there where you would agree to remove any dysfunctional antennas, or if you decided to go someplace else, that you would dismantle everything. That may be part of the original contract. I don't know. Those were just concerns that were mentioned that I thought were worthy of note. And I do. One person said, why couldn't you choose another location where there are no houses around at all? My sense is you've got some infrastructure already where you're proposing this project, and it's convenient and probably less expensive than establishing a whole new place. But I'm just thinking in terms of impact on residents, that I was wondering if you considered, you said you looked a lot, but I was wondering if you had considered a place to put this where there wouldn't be other homes around it.
All of those are great questions, and I'll definitely delve into those in greater detail on the 3rd, but I will just briefly state that there is quite an extensive search criteria that we go through. The engineers, based off of their models, are able to tell where we do have these gaps in coverage, and so they issue what are called search rings, and then we have our professionals scout the area looking for locations that fulfill the requirements that are entailed by the engineers, and part of that entails looking for, first and foremost, co-locatable structures. That's typically what we like to look for because it's the least intrusive for the most part, and then we like to look for situations where we have readily available access to utilities, and there's a whole lot more that goes into that again we'll go into greater detail about that on the 3rd. I do take note that some of these proposed conditions are something that staff will provide us, and that will be something that I'll have to take back to the applicant and see how they feel about that. They don't, on the surface, I do think some of your proposed conditions were already included in the proposed resolution, particularly the conditions or the concerns about obsolete equipment, and so that seems reasonable, and that I don't foresee that being an issue.
Okay, thank you. And I did want to say, too, I meant to say it before I said anything else, but I forgot, so I'll say it now. I'm really glad that there's going to be some, some better service here. So, I'm not against what you're trying to do at all. I'm just thinking of the impacts.
But, this is a team effort, and we do want to be sensitive to the community's concerns, and I'm expressing that on behalf of the applicant. It is our intention to do what we can do to accommodate some of these concerns within the scope and the confines of the legislation that's out there. And so, we'll continue to work with staff up until the July 3rd hearing and see if we can't address most of these questions, comments, and concerns that have been voiced.
Yeah, and if you do change the design to a tree, I think redwoods are really nice. If you get one of those.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I will tell you all that they are putting them on telephone poles in Santa Rosa,
Yeah, that small repeaters.
in
yeah.
people's front yards. So. And telephone poles. So. That's correct. Yeah, okay. Do I hear a motion to continue this?
So moved.
Second.
To a date, do I have to a date certain?
Third.
Yeah, okay. July, what?
Speak of the
July 4th?
July 3rd.
July 3rd, okay.
After or before the fireworks, Bobby?
July 3rd. Yeah. Second.
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Monette,
Yes.
Commissioner Pont,
Yes.
Commissioner Knudsen,
Yes.
Chair Kistner.
Yes. Next item is 5.2. It's the consideration of amendments to the city zoning code, St. Helena Municipal Code, Title 17, potentially revising floor area ratio, F.A.R, exemptions and maximums in Section 1732, low-density residential district, 1736, low-density residential district, 1 area, 1736, low-density residential, 1 area minimum district, 1740 medium-density residential district, and 1744 high-density residential district as deemed appropriate by the Planning Commission. I have a staff report, please, Aaron.
Yes, thank you, Chair Kistner and fellow commissioners. As noted in the staff report, the Planning Commission previously discussed floor area ratio on December 19th, 2017, where the Commission identified concerns over the size and scale of some of the newly constructed single-family homes and requested that staff provide information regarding the number of ADUs which have been constructed in St. Helena, and also asked staff to seek and provide information regarding how these ADUs are being utilized. In response to that, staff calculated the number of recently constructed ADUs and conducted a survey of property owners known to have been approved to construct ADUs within the city. Since 2010, approximately 22 additional ADUs have been built or are in the process of being built in St. Helena. The results of the survey generally support Commission perception that a majority of the ADUs are not rented separately from the main home and that they tend to be used in extension as the primary living space. At a follow-up meeting on January 16th, 2018, the Planning Commission suggested the following changes: reduce floor area ratio maximums by allowance of roughly 10%, clarify the code to delete exemption language related to 120 square foot or smaller sheds, maintain the 200 square foot exemption for garages but not for carports, and then have a discussion possibly allowing the carport exemption for multifamily projects. Consider putting a cap on the amount of porch that qualifies for a floor area ratio exemption, and continue to exempt basements with a maximum above grade projection of 2 feet to encourage that. As a result, staff has drafted code amendments addressing these issues, which are attached to the staff report. Staff, however, is not recommending that the 400 square foot exemption for ADUs be eliminated. Elimination of this exemption could prove problematic in determining that the city is implementing and maintaining compliance with the current adopted housing element. Further, such a departure and significant change in policy direction could prove problematic in getting the next housing element certified by HCD. Finally, staff has concerns that eliminating this exemption could be a violation of general plan conformance. At this time, staff recommends that the Planning Commission review the draft ordinance and proposed text amendments related to floor area ratio, and determine that the proposed text amendments are in keeping with the analysis and findings of the mitigated negative declaration adopted for the 2015 housing element, the analysis and findings in the 1993 General Plan and Zoning Code EIR, and are exempt from the requirements of CEQA pursuant to Section 15061. And recommend to the City Council that they approve the proposed ordinance in order to update and modify existing zoning code regulations related to floor area ratio in residential districts within the city. I don't know if you had anything you wanted to add to that.
I'll just reiterate the concern over conformance with the housing element, et cetera, over the potential elimination for floor area ratio exemption for ADUs. the commission, I'm sure, in looking over the survey data, identified that the results of the survey did support the commission's kind of assumptions regarding how ADUs are being utilized, in that a majority of the respondents indicated that they primarily serve as an extension of the primary residence. They are not being separately rented. Separately from that, however, staff has identified significant amounts of existing policy supporting and incentivizing ADU development, and identifying that ADUs are intended to be supported, and the development of ADUs are intended to be supported by city policy. And so staff has concerns with such a change coming in the zoning code, essentially not being compliant with that adopted policy. So with that, staff's happy to answer any questions and have any discussions. And one further point to make about the survey results: while most folks are using the ADUs as extensions of the primary residences and not renting them separately, staff did identify a significant number of respondents who are interested in participating in incentive programs offered by the city to further support ADU construction, and potentially they're renting, being rented at below market rates. So that is something that was a high point of the survey data from staff's perspective.
Any questions of staff?
Thank you, Chair Kistner. Director Hausch and Planner Heacock, I think we should note to begin with, I love the fact that we did a survey. I think that's fantastic. It's not a scientific survey, meaning that it's based on people's own response. It's like an internet survey, probably reasonable, but it's not the same as doing, sending out crews around town and specifically questioning every resident or every other resident, or it's not randomized, it's self-chosen, so there's some issues there. But it seems to support our potential thoughts about this. But it's curious. I really would like staff's thought on this. We are being encouraged by the state regulations and by housing advocates and this, that, and the other thing to do ADRs, do granny units. And yet the survey seems to indicate that granny units actually make no material difference in our housing situation. And yet we're supposed to continue it because, so it seems like we need to think of other solutions to our housing problems aside from trying to encourage people to create ADUs which end up not being used and simply as an extension of the existing floor area. I think this sort of supposed magic bullet that the state seems to think exists within existing zoning and existing housing footprints, at least like a town like St. Helena, may not actually work. And so I don't know if I had a conversation with the chair earlier today. I don't know if we as a commission, understanding these new facts, if maybe it makes sense to have a greater discussion, or perhaps a discussion with council regarding these issues, because I think these issues are bigger than just adjust the F.A.R. or play a little bit here, play a little bit there. I mean, yeah, people are upset, I think, about the max build out which is occurring in town. The changing economy may change that a little bit, but at the same time, I mean, we've got real pressure around housing. So the question is really about moderate and workforce and people who work here housing. This is important. I think F.A.R. is important. But it seems to be caught in this tension between our desire for creating more housing in town and something that's not going to, I don't think it's going to move the needle. That's all.
John?
I agree with David, is that F.A.R. doesn't really impact the construction of low-cost housing. And I think the survey, at least as unscientific as it is indicative of that. The city has allowed ADUs, has encouraged ADUs, and it turns out that the ADUs really aren't doing us much good. That tells me, like it tells David, we need some sort of different game plan. In the meantime, I would like to move forward on FARs, because that, although not having the effect to encourage low-cost housing, does encourage and does change how the city looks. And I think we have reached the point where we're seeing a lot of very large houses go up on very small lots, and super large houses go up on large lots. And I think this is the way to address that. It doesn't address our housing crisis, and I suppose because of state outlook, as much as anything else, we need to stay away from messing around with the exemption for the ADUs, recognizing at the same time that that is not doing us any real good.
Ms. Monet?
Well, this certain assumption that it's not doing us any good based on inadequate information is interesting to me. One of the things that wasn't asked on these surveys, I don't think, was who is living with the second units that were being used as an extension of the home. Who's living there? Is it someone's mom? Is it a student? A home, whatever. If it's someone's mom and there's no rent being charged, that's a low affordable housing unit being used as a low affordable housing unit that takes it off the rest of the market. So I think that there may be more advantage to having these second units, even if they're simply housing other members of the family who would otherwise have to be in other low-income places. I think that we have to look at that aspect of it. And I was, years ago, I was part of a presentation on second units to the City Council. I believe our current mayor was the chair of the Planning Commission at the time. And, I'm sorry. What? Okay. And at that time, we presented, it's important to, the city encourages in the ordinance the second units, but there has to be an education component. Like Santa Cruz, we went to all kinds of different towns around here and shared what their second unit programs were, and there's a protocol, and it takes a real commitment and a real effort to survey the whole community initially, and then do lots of education, lots of meetings and gathering to educate people about second units, what they can do, how they can do them, what the intention of the housing element and the city is in terms of what we do with them and so forth. So we haven't done that piece. So perhaps rather than throw the baby out with the bathwater, we could focus more on what's already been tried and true in other cities and do a really concerted education program for the community and get some better data, and then maybe go forward with not have such a negative aspect about how effective it is for housing people who need affordable housing in this town. So I'm a little more optimistic, which is really unusual. I'm usually very pessimistic, but I'm optimistic about infill and second units as being the best way to go in this town. We don't want to build up. And if we are discouraging and lowering the FAR so these big houses won't be built on these lots to the end, there will be room for second units that might be used in the way that we want them to be. So,
I'm going to open public comment. Is there any public comment?
My name is still Pat Dell. I agreed with all of you. I agreed with Mr. Knutson, Commissioner Knutson, that there's a real need for an actual scientific survey done by a survey company. I agree with Commissioner Ponte that you should do something about the FAR to try to cut down on the large homes that are being built. I agree with Commissioner Monette that there is a need for second units, but it's not a panacea for affordable housing. I felt so strongly when the planning director prior to Mr. Hausch sent in the annual report that has to be sent in on housing, and he used second units to indicate that the city had completely fulfilled its RENA requirements. That was absolutely false, absolutely false. And I wrote to the state a very long letter. I'd just come from the Housing Committee and had a lot of information, and of course they didn't answer me. So it occurs to me that there must be some incentives, some way to cut down. I mean, it's $600 a square foot to build right now. It's $600 a square foot to build affordable housing, just like it is to build, a mansion. So if there's some way the city could give an incentive to people in exchange for them agreeing, maybe not forever, but maybe for 5-10 years, to use that for moderate or lower income people to rent, I think that might be part of a solution.
My name's Tom Belt again. I'm asking for more clarification. Is it my understanding that this current issue before us would allow for single garages?
Excuse me. I'm sorry I didn't put it back up.
Well, it's okay.
She wants to hear you, Tom.
For single-car garages, is they're exempted from the F.A.R ratio? Do I understand
That's
that
one of the
correctly?
things that's to be discussed.
Okay. Well, I would just like to make a comment then, and for what it's worth, I would like to see that any type of a garage, whether it's a two-car garage or a one-car garage, be considered into the F.A.R ratio. I mean, there's a home being built right now on Allen and Adams Street, and they've got a single-car garage there, and it just adds to the massive look of the entire property. And I just think it would go a long way to helping us limit this massive building if we included the single-car garages as part of the F.A.R ratio. Thank you very much.
Any more public comment? I'll close public comment. Would you like to start discussion, Bobby?
I had a couple of questions. Sorry, I had a couple of questions and comments. First of all, we were going to talk about a cap on the deck square footage. I thought we had discussed that was one of the things that we had that you read that we had talked about, but I didn't see anything there, and I'm not sure if that's because we didn't do it or because I know that you
It's in here.
You made some changes. Pardon?
It's in there.
No. Oh, where's the cap? I didn't see where it said the cap.
I have to find it, but it's there.
If you look on page 75,
Thank you.
the staff
on
report,
page
so
86.
staff is recommending not including decks into the FAR calculation.
Oh, well, that's I really don't agree with that, but I thought when we had discussed it, there would be, that we had talked about having a cap on the square footage of a porch. But I guess that's and with language in there, if we don't have a cap, perhaps the language for number 5 on page 86B, under C, number 5, if we could add that, where did I put it now? That we would, that attention would be paid to the impacts of the porch to the neighbors in terms of privacy, noise, and lighting. If that were part of that, then you wouldn't have to put any cap on it, or you wouldn't have to be specific about how big it was, because it would really depend on the context. But if by expanding a porch or building a large porch would impact neighbors in terms of those three things. At least I feel that's important, and I think that would take the onus of trying to, make a one size fits all for the square footage away.
It's funny because to me, porches that are on, say, second floors have issues. Porches on the ground floor, build from my perspective. It really depends on where the porch is, doesn't it?
Well, no,
Ms.
it
Monette?
depends on how the porch is used. If it's used for gatherings and drinking and and partying, which many of the porches are, and that's why they want them bigger. The lighting is late. If it's close, I'm just talking about if the porch is closer to because they're closer to an adjoining property, the noise, the lighting, and the privacy could be an impact on the bottom floor as well as the top.
Okay,
I totally agree with you about the top floor.
I'm pretty sure that we did discuss capping the size of the porch, not eliminating. I completely agree with staff's position that that's architecturally important to a lot of structures, and to this point, I'm not aware of anybody taking advantage of our "they don't count" rule to essentially cover their lot with porch. However, I would like some reasonable cap on the size of porches, and I'm pretty sure we did discuss that at least once at a meeting. I don't know what the size would be, and it could be a cumulative size in my mind, but I don't know if it's of value to have 2,000 square feet of porch on a 4,000 square foot lot.
Do you think it'd be easier?
I'd really like to see some cap to that.
You'd like a figure rather than conditions. It's pretty arbitrary, depending. If nobody lives around, or it depends. So it depends on the context. It seems to me.
Maybe you want to make that a part of your FAR.
I do like the idea of excluding porches because of
Yeah.
that the American gathering place, the eyes on the front, all that good stuff. But
Eyes on the front?
yeah. You put porches in the front, you've got eyes in the front.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Right? You're out there looking.
See and be seen.
I never see people on porches in this town, in front porches. I'd like to see people on front porches.
But I would just like to have some way of telling a project proponent, no, here's our rule. Nice, bright line. You can't have 1,000 square feet of porch on your lot. Something. I don't know what the cap be. 1,000's a little large, I'm sure, but we can probably come to some sort of reasonable idea.
Maybe, I'm sorry, I don't want to throw a wet blanket on this, but I just almost think that this deserves sort of a shape approach, meaning we take more input and try and reach consensus. I really am, because, for example, on the Smith residence back in December that we approved, remember how the neighbors were concerned about the carport is less attractive than a garage because the carport has all the junk sitting outside? So it seems like you'd want to therefore incentivize garages versus carports. But the gentleman spoke up about the massing that garages can add to a space. And I don't know if we have any answers here is what I'm trying to say. And it feels like it's worth a further discussion.
Well, that's what I was thinking, rather than try to get metrics and establish metrics, which can be difficult. If we can state some values in terms of impact in the language, that would be easier to adapt as each case came along. Does that make sense to you?
That was another thing that I was curious about that I'm pretty sure had been brought up at one point, was the 200 square foot exemption for garages, and currently and carports. You're mandated to have one on your property. I don't know why we give an exemption for something you're mandated to have. I would think that in the real world, if you're mandated to have something, you don't get an exemption for it. I mean, to have a house, you have to have a bathroom. We do not give F.A.R. exemptions for bathrooms. And well, you're mandated if you don't have a house without one, right? It's not legally a house. So you have to have a bedroom. Once again, we don't give exemptions for bedrooms. You're legally mandated to have one in a house. So I'm a little uncomfortable giving an exemption for something we must have in code. So I'd be all in favor of saying, okay, you have to have a garage or a carport, but you don't get any F.A.R. exemptions for it because you're mandated to have one.
Or, John, maybe you only get a FAR exemption if you put it in the back of the house so it doesn't have impacts on the neighbors. I mean,
Our plan already calls for that, and we don't follow it.
I know, so make it explicit. Say, we'll give you a 200-foot exemption, but only if the garage is behind the back wall of the existing home. I mean, there's ways to do this, that we could do this to be, if we want to be aggressive, and we could completely say, hey, build as big a porch as you want on the front of the house, but in the back of the house, we got limits. I mean, if you want eyes on the front, encourage building in the front. And there's two things. In my mind, I'm not sure we have the expertise, and also there's unintended consequences. I just wonder if we could have a bigger process around this that takes input and puts a decision that is going to be a little less ad hoc.
I think we will have, at the end of the day, David, this is sort of an interim process as we approach a full rewrite as the general plan is complete. So I see this as not only a stopgap exercise, if you will, but also an exercise in getting our minds as commissioners into thinking about just the kind of things you mentioned. You know, do we want to go this way? Do we want to go that way? But I think at the present time, if we recommend to the City Council doing some of these simple things, then we can come back and tackle the larger issues as the general plan rolls around, and we have to tackle them.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with not having exemption for the garages, but I have one more thing, one more comment that I had. On that same page, under C number 4, we had talked about non-habitable and habitable basements and attics, and I think apropos of what you were just saying, Commissioner Knudsen, that we had, I thought, decided that we would like to encourage people using the attics and the basements for living, and so that we were going to change that so that all basements and attics, but we defined the basement to not being more than, I think, instead of 4 feet, 2 feet. But I thought, what? It's down there?
Yeah. I remember the discussion was around basements
no, I know, yeah.
But there wasn't a general agreement on the attics. On the basements, we did agree on.
That's correct.
That if somebody wanted to put something below grade so it didn't add to the massing, you were fine.
Wait a second.
I think it's my turn now. I agree with what you just said, John, about the basements. We said if they were at grade, that they could condition them, but we did not consider doing any conditioning of the attics. I have some comments. I agree with basically what John and David said about the ADUs. You're looking for an incentive on the ADUs, and I don't think it is, and this is my personal opinion, I'm not a lawyer, maybe Tom can look into this, but my feeling is the ADUs that was just passed by the state, the intent was to increase affordable housing. And you're looking for an incentive, and I would say that the incentive that I would like to see is that if you will do what maybe Pat said about doing an ADU and saying for 10 years I'll rent it to medium or low housing, that's fine, and we will give you a FAR exemption for that. But other than that, your ADUs is part of your FAR. And those are the comments that I would have at this point. And I don't disagree with much of what anybody said, although I really think that we don't want to mess around with the architectural appearance of the outside of some of the homes in St. Helena, because I think most of the homes in St. Helena with the porches make what we call, and I don't like this word, the characteristics of St. Helena. And I really think that we really have to start worrying about some of the aesthetics in this town. And I don't think by eliminating the porches, particularly the porches in the front, that's going to accumulate that. I also agree that this needs a lot more study, and I'm not ready to vote on this unless you really think we have to. And as a matter of fact, I guess I would entertain a motion that we go the way that David had asked.
Which was what?
I beg your pardon?
Which was what?
What I was thinking is that we could either have a working session, or depending on the requirements of the Brown Act, to have a process where we really investigate this from a community perspective. We know what we want. We have some ideas. I'm worried about unintended consequences, right? And so let's have some sort of a roundtable or some sort of process where we, by the end of the summer, we've got an outcome that we're all ready to vote on. I don't know what that process is, but
So you feel that way about all the changes here, or just
I
a few
do
of them?
actually. Yeah.
And if we're going to do that, if that's the intent, then maybe we just wait for the new general plan, which we're supposed to have almost by the end of summer, a month or two. October, I believe, we're supposed to have that. Are we on schedule for that, Noah?
We are on schedule for the EIR to come out in late summer, early fall, maybe mid-fall, for the EIR process to be going. But that essentially means December for adoption would be the soonest.
Okay. What does this pause do from your perspective? I mean,
so you'll recall the commission prioritized working on this issue. This is the third time it's been discussed by the commission. The city council has prioritized housing as a housing strategy as necessary to be undertaken, and that process is essentially being kicked off within the next 30 days by this white paper that the city council commissioned to have drafted and will become public and presented to the council, I believe, like I said, in one of the next two meetings. So the outcome of this is that no changes will be made to the floor area ratio, and projects will continue to come in utilizing the existing floor area ratios and exemptions that are living in the zoning code, and the Planning Commission will be faced with reviewing projects that utilize that existing standard, which often has resulted in concern from the Commission over the size and scale, which is why staff has brought this and why it was prioritized as a discussion.
Director Hausch, is there a way that we could take advantage of the white paper that's going to the council? Because it's funny with this FAR thing. So there's both a housing aspect to the FAR and to the the accessory dwelling unit, that's exemptions, et cetera, and then there's also just the good citizens of this town are sort of fed up with the development in town. So there's sort of there's a tension, right? There's a tension for we need more housing, and then there's a tension of they're building these crazy big houses, and we've somehow agglomerated these things together instead of sort of separated these out. So the council's getting a white paper on the housing thing. Separately, we're trying to respond to citizens' concerns about the crazy size of these have to be approved homes. Should we separate this out? Why are we, or is there a way that we can manage this in a little way? I mean, part of my discomfort is I think that we're all sort of slightly on different pages, and also we don't have Commissioner Hardy here today. And I'd love us to have a unified voice that we give this to council if we can.
I have a question. If we were to approve this and you were to make the changes as a step, when the general plan comes up, would we be able to revisit in the way that was described tonight and make changes if we wanted?
So I don't want to commit to a specific process, as that requires council approval. We work under the city council's adopted strategies and goals. However, the general plan and the city council have identified that updating the entire zoning code comprehensively is a strategy and goal that they've set in motion and will be undertaken after the general plan is adopted. Getting to Commissioner or Chair Kistner's point is that will require a comprehensive zoning code analysis and update, and all of these issues may be able to be addressed through that process. This was, as identified in the staff report and as we've discussed many times, somewhat of a Band-Aid approach, trying to get to some of the issues that have continually frustrated the Commission. Right. So we're just trying to respond to that direction. If the direction is to put a pause on it and let's do it comprehensively, we can do that.
If I can make a suggestion here, that the mild disagreements we've had seem to circulate around the garages and the deck/porch sizes, right?
And basements.
And Bobby, you okay with the basements now?
You mean as opposed to basements and attics?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I still feel good. I can live with that.
All right. If we can just go with everything else, which is
not much,
pretty much what they've got. Well, it reduces the F.A.R. I mean, across the board,
including not having an exemption for garages. Any garages?
You're just going to leave it as it is. Just leave the garages as it is now, leave the decks as it is for now,
and
leave go with everything else. We're making progress. We're still going to come back to this thing in 6 months, 7 months,
we're
8
come
months,
back
whatever.
Anyway.
Within a year, we'll be back.
So, John, you're making the case that on page 80 that basically the FARs and the maximum gross floor area are changed and nothing else.
The two disagreements I've heard here are over the decks and over the garages, right? The exemption for the garages / carport, and then the deck size thing.
And the ADUs.
Well, the ADUs, I'm going to suggest we not touch those, at least until we hear from council what we can and cannot do. Since they're now a right, I'm not sure you can condition that right, but you can maybe give some bonuses if they do something for the right. I don't know. There's a quid pro quo there. I hope that's possible.
So I could be supportive of only touching the FARs and nothing else.
And that's essentially what everything else does
But those are very, very small. Some of them are 100 square feet. And if you're looking at the list of things that are going from 1,800 to 1,700 square feet, John, my personal opinion is that we should wait now until the council is finished with their housing paper.
I think we should approve it the way it is now and do those changes later. Personally, I don't see why we should carve anything out. That's kind of making it more complicated than it is. I think it's honoring the work that's in our request so that we have it slightly updated from 1993, particularly the FAR, which comes up a lot in here. I don't know. I also want to know if you can, on that number 4 under C, put in habitable instead of...
If we leave it, Bobby,
anyway.
we leave it. All right. If we start trying to jam in our own little things, then we'll all be jamming in our own little things.
I thought we had agreed to do that already. That's the only reason I bring it up. That's not.
No, we talked about basements, not about attic.
Okay.
I understand what the chair is saying. However, the idea of momentum at least means something to me. We'd get this done, and I don't think our problems, at least my understanding of our problems with F.A.R. as a commission, have been on the small size. They have been on the large size, where somebody comes in and they're within 20 square feet of the max on a 10,000-foot lot. It hasn't been somebody coming in with on a 4,000 square foot lot. It's been on the other end of the spectrum, and this has a higher effect at that end of the spectrum than at the small end of the spectrum. So, I don't think this would stop anybody from building a house. It would just say, okay, you can't have the master closet that's big enough to put a bowling alley in. And I'm kind of in favor of that.
Well, John, and I think that's going to be a lot of work for a very little gain. And I think that we have some very important things that the city needs to do, and I think that if we follow what the city council does with their white paper on housing, then I think that you're going to be a lot better off with that and with the new general plan.
So you'd encourage,
That's my opinion.
us to wait until
That's
the package is ready.
That would be my recommendation, yes. Until we have a complete package to work with.
Why did we ask them to do it? A little late. Oh, well.
I made my pitch, and there it sits.
Well, I think the challenge, Commissioner Monette, is we don't really have consensus is the challenge. If we had consensus, if the solution was obvious, I think we'd all be voting away. I mean, I really appreciate staff's work on this. I mean, it's very careful, and generally cautious. I think it's fits with state mandates. We're stuck in a real conundrum, you know. That's
Will
what I
save you
believe.
guys a lot of time not to have to make the changes?
From the staff perspective, again, we were trying to address a concern that regularly gets voiced by the commission by trying to address the F.A.R concerns. And so we had 3 meetings to get input from the commission. We implemented that input into proposed zoning code changes, and we were hoping to get a recommendation as to what the commission felt was appropriate from those changes. We notified significant numbers of the development community, real estate professionals, to review and comment on these through the 3 meetings that we've held. I think the fact that we haven't had significant numbers of folks commenting has indicated that they're generally palatable from the perspective of folks who are in the development and real estate community. I do agree it is a cautious first step, but it was in an effort to address something that is regularly voiced as a concern.
Yeah, I could go either way. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to make a motion that we wait until the white paper is finished and we're closer to the approved general plan.
Chair Kistner, is there a process that you can think that I mean, maybe the 3 public meetings is enough. Didn't feel like enough to me. Is there anything else we need to do maybe we need Gene? I don't know. I mean, it's all got to be public meetinged, but and noticed. But maybe we should have Gene in a round table or something. I don't know.
It's okay if we don't have to always be consensus, though. It's okay.
This is so important that I think it's useful to be consensus. I mean, the biggest things that we voted on so far this year that I've been on in the 2 years, we've all agreed, pretty much.
That's interesting.
I like that.
Well, there's a motion on the floor.
Chair Kistner, could you modify your motion to include some additional public session with that might be a Gene meeting?
The city council would have to direct that to occur. That would require resources and expenditure
And I
funding.
believe that'll come out of their paper, David. That's
Will it?
my belief.
Well, I see that there are a few council members here today. Perhaps they'll
Can't do that.
No.
I think the council will understand the
Can't do that.
concerns of the commission in their struggles with this issue.
Yeah,
I
thanks.
second it.
You second my motion?
I did.
Roll call, please.
Chair Kistner,
Yes.
Commissioner Monette,
Yes.
Commissioner Knudsen,
Yes.
Commissioner Pont,
Sure.
Where the hell are And we do appreciate your work, the 2 of you. At least I do. I think we all do.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Do you have any department
We
reports?
do. We have a fairly extensive department report this evening. Just wanted to identify that the first meeting of July is where the chair and the vice chair are voted on, as well as the secretary. So just please be prepared to make those nominations and votes next meeting. Separately, the council has adopted new board and commission and committee protocols. I think Chair Kistner remembered or identified one of those changes tonight in the 4-minute public comment extension. So
See, I can read.
Exactly. A change in that, but one of the other more significant changes is we have converted from Robert's Rules of Order to Rosenberg's Rules of Order. This will be somewhat of a significant procedural change. For those of you who are not familiar, essentially a motion and a second is made prior to discussion under these rules, and the intent is that the discussion is very focused on that motion. If the motion is to be changed, then you'll have the individual who made the motion has to accept a friendly amendment to it. So it can be kind of interesting, and the folks who are clerking the meetings will have to keep fairly accurate records. It'll be a little bit of gymnastics for them. We'll do some training on it. We'll do some practice runs, but just expect some changes to how our discussions are structured. And again, the goal is to focus discussion on a very specific topic. So the motion has to be seconded, and then you can discuss, and then folks can recommend friendly amendments to modify that. The individual who made the motion does not have to accept those amendments, so you can have kind of a lot of motions and seconds and actions before you actually get to a decision.
Director Hausch, is this a state mandate?
No, this is a council mandate.
It is.
So the council voted to change these protocols. It is recommended from the League of Cities. A lot of cities are going this way. I've seen it done. I've been a part of it. In a previous jurisdiction, we converted 4 boards and commissions, all operated in the public on television at one time. Some boards take to it a little bit better than others, or a little more easily than others, but it will not be, staff is not concerned, but just wanted to give the heads up to the commission. We will do a training and have some practice runs so folks can get used to it.
Is this Dave Rosenberg, the former city council member for the city of Davis?
I'm not sure, but it would not surprise me.
If it is, run in the other direction really fast.
So just wanted to let the commission know those are now the rules that govern our meetings. And so in addition to the 4-minute timeline, we will also be updating the bylaws. There's some references, obviously, to Robert's Rules of Order in here. And then I know the commission has expressed some concerns over the bylaws since we updated them last in 2016. So please review the copies you have in your packets. Come prepared to have a discussion on those when we agendize it. Separate from that, the City Council, as I'm sure you're well aware, has contracted with Cosmont to do a downtown study of our retail uses. Staff is requesting 2 volunteers from the commission to participate in kind of a preview of that presentation, to work with the city manager and subcommittee of the City Council. And so if we could get 2 volunteers of the commission to work on that, the idea would be that they are available for a 1 p.m. meeting on July 10th.
Gee, I volunteer Lester Hardy.
It is a Tuesday. July 10th at 1 p.m. at City Hall. Ms. Monette and Mr. Knudsen, thank you, sir, and Miss. And finally, well, maybe not finally yet. We, in response to the direction from the commission, staff initiated a survey for folks. We did both direct mailer survey of folks we knew who had approved ADUs, and then also a general internet survey of everyone who subscribes to the city's e-news system. And in order to try to incentivize folks to participate, we offered a gift basket to be drawn to folks who provided their contact information. We have a list of the names of folks who have provided that contact information, and we thought that Chair Kistner would be the appropriate person to draw the name of who won the gift basket. And so Zinnia Gamero has all the names in a container there, and we'd like Chair Kistner to pull the name, and then that'll be the recipient of the city's gift basket for participating in the survey.
I just want to say we had a total of 83 names in here.
I don't believe hers is, but yours may be.
What is the gift basket, if I may ask?
It's a basket of local goods from downtown, so olive oil, honey, coffee from folks who are downtown the business.
Mr. Richard Wallach?
You have to be present to win.
So, thank you for that, and we'll be contacting Mr. Wallach. And then finally, as we've talked about earlier, it's Ms. Kistner's, Chair Kistner's last meeting tonight. I've come from a tradition of providing kind of a little bit of a roast situation for folks who have put on or have participated such a long, so much time for the city. And so, given that, we've prepared a resolution for you that we hope you appreciate, and the city clerk has offered to read it as kind of a celebration for your last meeting. And so, Cindy's going to be here to do so.
Resolution of the Planning Commission of the City of St. Helena granting approval to relinquish the gavel to Chairwoman Ms. Grace Kistner, citizen of the City of St. Helena. On June 11th, 2010, Ms. Grace Kistner submitted an application for consideration to be a planning commissioner in the City of St. Helena at What Was I Thinking Lane in the Never Again zoning district. And whereas Ms. Kistner was always known to wear colorful and interesting socks, often displayed in very visible footwear. And whereas Ms. Kistner may at other times have had images of adult beverages located somewhere on her clothing. And whereas Ms. Kistner was tenacious in her request for color and material boards to be presented with design review requests, occasionally even having had this request fulfilled. And whereas Ms. Kistner was never shy in using her gavel, motivating staff to conduct stress fracture checks after lively meetings to ensure its structural integrity was maintained. And on June 19th, 2018, the Planning Commission of the City of St. Helena, State of California, considered her request to resign from the commission, and all testimony, written and spoken, including her request that she not be required to read another draft of the general plan, not at a duly noticed public hearing. Now, therefore, let it be resolved that the Planning Commission and city staff half-heartedly approve her request to resign as chairwoman of the City of St. Helena Planning Commission on the following basis. The Planning Commission has considered and reluctantly supports the resignation of Ms. Kistner with the caveat that she must return and occasionally speak her mind on projects which pique her interest, and with the understanding that she may be asked to serve on a subcommittee or two.
Thank you, Cindy.
And we do actually have one more thing that we would like to present you, and Mayor Galbraith has agreed to do that.
And what I have...
Hey, Sean. Tom, I'll share them. They're not big enough.
And what I have is a plaque. But as I provide you with the plaque, I also have a few brief remarks. You may be seated.
Thank you.
Grace was initially appointed to the Planning Commission by Mayor Britton and reappointed by Mayor Navarro. They showed great judgment. I would reappoint her in a heartbeat. Unfortunately, she is declining a third term, even though there is no term limit against it. This is a big loss. Grace has, graced the Commission with integrity, enthusiasm, and uncommon common sense. She knows the issues well. She never hesitates to let you know where she stands. She does so with clarity and lucidity. She has chaired the Commission with distinction. Her analysis and opinion will be most missed. The good news for me is that I can continue to look forward to receiving her views on issues facing our city. And so now let's present the plaque. And the plaque reads, "Presented to Grace Kistner in recognition of your distinguished and outstanding service to the City of St. Helena Planning Commission, Commissioner, July 2010, June 2016, Chair, July 2016, June 2018. Thank you so much for your 8 years of service.
Thanks, Ellen.
There you go.
Thank you. It's been a lot of work, but it's been a lot of fun, and I certainly enjoy meeting and being friends with all of you. Thank you all for a wonderful 10 years.
Shall we gavel the meeting close? Yeah.
Come on, I can add with it.
You have to gavel it.
I got another one home. Didn't like it from
You got two now.
yeah. All right, you have an agenda forecast?
That was it?
That was it? Meeting's adjourned.
Right.